Just for explanations, when we started planning this event, and we do take some time to plan events, um, we didn't expect this many people, and we more thought of it as a continuation of what we did last year in Bratislava, and also what we did the year before in Prague. So as an apology, I will not talk about the basics of SCOs here, even if for some of you this might be a new concept. Simply, as you can see, we don't have the time, and also we would first kindly invite you to also make use of the already existing documents, and we have a specific online course for simplified cost options. So instead, we thought we rather reflect a little bit on the use of SCOs in terms of mandatory and what are the options available for that, and as well as comparing that with regard to SPF, so Article 25, and outside that frame. And then also, if we find the time to start, maybe just food for thought, a little bit about the whole management and control cycle with regard to small projects, because there are also quite a number of considerations that might be new because of the new frame, or that can also be a rethinking in case you don't want to switch with your current setup to Article 25, but would then go and implement it under direct management. Iris, if you could move to the next slide. We kick off the session with the few questions we have from the registration. And the first one is, as always, with the mandatory use of SCOs. What does that mean in terms for the Article 24? And 2 slides over, we will explain this and compare this, and hopefully then it's clear. If it's not clear, please let us know immediately, because then we try a different approach. Can we use flat rates as SCOs, or must we have some lump sums or unit costs? The regulations allow for all 3 forms of simplified cost options. There's no obligation that it has to be one. It can be a mix. It can be a mix of a combination of what we call the off-the-shelf flat rate, off-the-shelf options, meaning those coming directly from the regulation, combined with something program specific, or even let's put some draft budget methodology in. The last bullet point, how will the use of SCOs affect the management verifications from the controller's point of view? We have a short point of that in the section. I hope we managed to get there. Just to be very clear, in the frame of management verifications, the use of SCOs is limited to making sure that the methodology is applied correctly. So you're not going to check any underlying costs. You, in case of flat rates, will have to double check that the basis costs are clean, so that we can avoid any double financing, and otherwise that the percentage of the flat rate is correctly calculated. Similar to unit costs and lump sums, for unit costs, you will make sure that the units reported are in line with the amounts calculated from that unit. And for lump sums, maybe on top that the deliverables have been provided. With this, I would close there and move to the next slide, Iris. The draft budget is a method and not an SCO. Yes, that is absolutely right, and that is very important to keep in mind. Does it mean that by using a draft budget composed only of direct costs, not SCOs, I do not fulfill the obligations of Article 25.6 under 100,000 euros of public contribution, meaning that I have to mandatorily use simplified cost options for the implementation? We drafted a bit of a longer answer right here, but just to be very clear, the draft budget method is a methodology, and as a result, you come up with potentially one or several different simplified cost options. When this is followed up afterwards, what will be looked at is that you comply with the total amount of public contribution for the mandatory use, and the corresponding project. So it is not relevant in the control from our perspective later on whether a draft budget methodology was used to arrive to SCOs to cover projects with less than 100,000 euros of public contribution, or if you made use of other options. So we hope that at least clarifies it. And again, also an opportunity for us to apologize maybe that we are not always clean in using or referencing draft budget. We sometimes might make the mistake of putting the draft budget on the same level of as an SCO, as a simplified cost options. This is not the case. It is really a methodology, and at the end of the methodology stands a simplified cost option. Okay, and with this, maybe to the next slide that should hopefully clarify many of the questions you've been asking today, but also in the registration. The mandatory use, that is for Article 24, your relevant legal frame here is Article 48 from the Common Provisions Regulation as it stands at the moment, and your threshold is 200,000 euros total costs, meaning any projects in under direct management, as Dirk has nicely explained and as Dorota has also pointed out in her presentation, means that you have to mandatorily use simplified cost options for the implementation. Below that, you see the exceptions, in which case you don't have to implement such projects with simplified cost options. I let you read them yourselves. What I just would like to make clear is, and Martin has also said this very nicely in the previous intervention, and I think hopefully Regina will also agree, don't start looking for how you can make use of the exceptions. This threshold was introduced by the legislator to make the life of beneficiaries easier. And simplified cost options are an excellent tool to make the life of beneficiaries easier. We fully understand that it doesn't necessarily mean, in particular, when setting up the system, it makes the life of the managing authority easier, because I think both Martin and Regina said very clearly, this is a lot of work and this takes time and you need to think about many things. And then if something like COVID comes along, your whole system might be, screwed up, but still, there are specific exceptions, but don't try to make use of these exceptions just because you think the work is too much. Think about the advantages for your beneficiaries and that it pays out during the implementation of the projects. Just to mirror this, under Article 25.6 in the Interreg regulation, you also have an obligation to use simplified cost options, but you do have a different threshold. And this might be a bit confusing, but I think once you've decided how you want to implement your small scale or small projects, it is very clear. Under Article 25, the threshold is at 100,000 euros public contributions. Then there is a mandatory use of simplified cost options for the implementation. Also, notably, one of the exceptions that you find in the Common Provision Regulation is not given, and that is for projects in the area of research implementation. Quick word on the option for using the draft budget as a calculation method to set up simplified cost options. There are also specific thresholds framed in the regulation. Again, for the Common Provisions Regulation, it's Article 48. And there you have a limit of a ceiling of 200,000 euros of total cost. As long as your projects are within this, you are allowed to base your simplified cost options on a draft budget method. Again, slightly different for small, within the frame of the small projects article. in the Interreg regulation, there your ceiling, your threshold is your projects, your small projects need to be below 100,000 euros total costs. And I hope that was clear. On the next slide, we thought we cover state aid with a few bullet points, and then we saw your questions, and now we have to rethink our approach. I had at first an idea, in particular, Teresa, to your question, but I really skipped talking further about it. Just to keep in mind, SCOs are in principle compatible with state aid, may it be under the articles from the GBA, may it be in a regular notification scheme, whatever. But in this case, you don't have to use that. It becomes optional. We've said it now on several slides, but I'm also going to say it out loud. De minimis is not considered state aid in the future programming period. So the moment you grant de minimis, their expenditure is just like any other expenditure. And as said, however, in terms of definition, sorry, any option from the GBA is considered state aid. So much as a, I would say, light introduction to the topic. We come back to it at a later point. The next slide is just a few reminders for the use of SCOs, in particular with regard to Article 25. I've explained it now exhaustively, different thresholds, so pay attention. There is a question that we're also asking ourselves, and that is, if your systems of SCOs and approach to using the draft budget methodology is developed at program level, what are the resulting obligations for the small project fund beneficiary? So is this something also to be considered for them? And then a reminder, because we see now when we discuss small projects and simplify cost options a lot, that people have the tendency to easily forget about the off-the-shelf options from the regulations. And there are many, and they are useful, and they are as applicable to small projects as they are to regular Interreg programs, projects. So don't forget them for administration costs, for staff costs, for travel and accommodation costs. So there is quite a bouquet available. With the next slide, I'm looking at the time. I might just go very quickly, Bernard, and it's enough if you just not, because we wanted to kind of start the discussion on an efficient as it can get in Interreg for financial management. And the first thing we kind of as our starting point, we now have an SPF, a small project fund. Please, in the triangle with the managing authority, then the SPF beneficiary, and then there are management verifications. On the next slide, things you need to consider with regard to management and control. Don't forget, with regard to simplified cost options, the managing authority is ultimately the responsible body for designing it, and they also have to take the responsibility later on for it. So there needs to be a strong communication between the SPF beneficiary and the managing authority. For management verifications, it's a bit complex from our perspective, and I'm happy if Dirk also wants to say something about it, as he's been more involved in the legal frame. In principle, management verifications are the responsibility of the managing authority. However, when you look further into the article, the member states may set up their own systems. So there needs to be, again, a close link of communication between those two levels, and to be seen if there are going to be major changes in the future setup when it comes to the responsibilities of management verifications. One new element, and that is really important, is that management verifications are to be carried out based on a risk-based sampling strategy, which is defined ex ante. So there's no more the expectation that expenditure reported to the program is controlled at 100% if it complies with the risks identified at program level. And then the control of the proper application of the respective SCO methods is what I said at the beginning. Management verifications and simplified cost options are limited to making sure that the application of the simplified cost option is correct. And then we have the small project fund beneficiary, who is basically is not an intermediate body as of the regulatory frame. However, when looking at the different responsibilities, there is it is very similar, to put it diplomatically, if not to say the same, to put it bluntly. The responsibilities really require an excellent working relationship, meaning trust, coordination, and communication between the SPF beneficiary and the managing authority, at least from our point of view. For many of you, it will just be a continuation of what you anyway have established over the past years. Okay, and then maybe just very quickly, if you can look into the next slide, which reflects very nicely also our learning process from today, in particular on your left-hand side with regard to small-scale projects, which are not covered under Article 25. So we thought it would still be possible, but it will not be possible that you have some form of umbrella operation or a small-scale project facility or whatever you were thinking to call it. In fact, it would be more like in the next slide, which I hope after the shuffling around, exactly, it will be a directly managed project. It will become as any other project you're going to run. For the small projects reporting structure, just to it's been lengthy discussed. Just to highlight on the lowest level, we put a question mark with the lead partner principle, just to reflect that the Water and Dirk have highlighted this before. There might not be a need to have like a typical partnership. It can also be just a final recipient, but we think some might still go for it. So just to keep this in mind. On the next slide, we just try to start collecting on what does that mean for management verifications. A few considerations. We won't have time to discuss this directly with you. What are your thinking? What are your thoughts? What are your plans in that respect? But one of the questions certainly is, will management verifications be handled by the small project fund beneficiary? Will it be go through the regular or the to be set up system at member state level? And one very important point in particular, when we make the circle back to the use of the mandatory use of simplified cost options, is kind of, okay, if you implement small projects almost exclusively through simplified cost options, what is the actual work of the management verifications limited to? What would you need in this context? So really to rethink maybe systems which are currently in place, but will require amendments for the future due to the application of simplified cost options. The same goes also with regard to management verifications for the SPF beneficiary who is in operation. So also something you need to consider when setting up the system. What will this look like? Will you maybe also use simplified cost options towards your SPF beneficiary from MA perspective? Some things to consider. Next slide.
Just Katja, yeah. Maybe very briefly, what would be apparently quite logic to us is that the SPF beneficiary is, for example, the one to check the results of the small projects. because the SPF beneficiary is dealing with the final recipients on a daily basis. So we would see it quite clear that this is part of the task of the SPF beneficiary. And when you think now into a system of simplified cost options, checking the results is one of the key points. So besides a proper communication from managing authority towards the SPF beneficiary to train the SPF beneficiary on the proper application of any simplified cost option applied at program level or of any calculation method applied. So there needs to be a proper training simply for safety reasons between MA SPF, the MA being ultimately responsible for the simplified cost option, the SPF beneficiary being, so to say, the one close to final beneficiaries, to daily practice, to implementing all that. That needs proper training, but for us it's quite logical that then the SPF beneficiary is the one to check the results, to see if there are eventual project changes or etc. But of course, having always as a backup the sound knowledge in JS, MA to give advice to the SPF beneficiary in that regard. So what we strongly advertise for is one standardized unified SCO system at program level, soundly providing training to this very specific beneficiary called SPF beneficiary, who holds a very specific position in the program and has a bit more of liability and has to deal with a bit more risks, which is also in many cases a wish of the program to attract new applicants. And we all know that opening the old boys club really to new applicants opens new risks, brings up new risks, but exactly that might be desired by the monitoring committee after 3-4 periods of funding of very similar same institutions previously. So this is what we mean by think about it. And coming from 100% control of every single small invoice means also huge training, change of mindsets between MA and management verification, because this is not the point of simplified cost options. It's not the point to count tickets when pupils have visited a museum in the border area. This is no more the point. Your simplified cost option covers that. It's only the point that the kids have been there and there is some light evidence that the kids have been there. That's it, full stop. So just to really rethink the system and not put over again the fully fledged program system, program approach towards management verification over the SPF simply for safety reasons. Because then everybody will go nuts. You will have maybe 90, 200, 300 more projects, an incredible administrative load, and let's say efficiency gains, effectivity gains will be rather zero in that case.
Thanks, Bernhard. I think really this last point, you need to look at your system. It's not going to be business as usual for the third programming period, in particular in respect of the mandatory use of SCOs. Okay, my proposal is we skip questions, but maybe if somebody could go put this, I would put the Slido link in there just to see what kind of questions we have. Iris, I'm going to not look at this slide. I'm also not going to look at the one after. So next. Thank you. The 3 slides before were just some brief introduction, probably nothing new for you, just reminders with regard to the audit trail, which also requires maybe a bit of rethinking in light of the SPF beneficiary being an operation, and what does that mean in terms of MA relation, SPF beneficiary, and then your small projects. So, but you can look at this individually. We will send, of course, the presentation as well as other material used after the event. But one thing which is important is the setup of audits in the next programming period. because there is a new approach to audit of operations in Interreg. And the audit of operations will be organized along a common sample. I'm not going to go into details here, but just to tell you that all Interreg programs will be basically the sample from which a joint sample will be drawn from the Commission, and that will lead to a significant reduction of audits of operations at program level. And there have been discussions once this proposal was put in the new regulation and then also approved in the first rounds of negotiations by the Parliament and the Member States with audit authorities and also with programs. And there was also a particular moment to talk about how does that affect small project funds under Article 25. And the agreement that at the moment stands between the Commission and the colleagues from the audit unit and the audit authorities is that for small projects funds, so Article 25, the sample unit will be the fund. So the operation will go into the sample and might be drawn out of the sample and might be audited under audit of operations. There is also currently the agreement that in this case, a subsampling, meaning the recipients, not all recipients within the small project funds will be audited, but there is a subsampling applied by the concerned audit authority, and so only a few recipients will be checked. I think this was just one important piece of information we didn't talk too much about yet. And as I said, it's an agreement that stands off today. I think once the regulations are final, I think the discussions continue. If you have major concerns, don't hesitate to share with us. It's always good to see all perspectives.